Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, Monday Night Football edition, NFL Week 5. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, how are you this fine Monday morning?
Could be better. Could be better. That's for sure. Been a little bit of a frustrating season. Let's just put it that way.
That is putting it mildly on a variety of fronts as we watch the odds board continue to move rapid fire out here around 7 a.m. on the West Coast for all of the Week 6 matchups that are there. For all those folks tuning in, Monday mornings all about the good, the bad, and the ugly, look-ahead lines, some injury updates from Dr. Deepak Chona, and, of course, a preview of the Raiders and Packers. So, Payne, rather than sugarcoating things, we may as well jump right into what we saw unfold on Sunday Night Football, and that was a downright disappointing and embarrassing performance from the Dallas Cowboys on a variety of fronts.
Yeah, let's start where the crime was last night. Very boy, I don't know. Let me just put it that way. I don't know. Like, you feel good about games that you bet and then get confirmation later on. And that was one of those. We were, Dallas +4 was a pretty nice size bet for us. And as the week kind of continues forward and you find out who is also on that game, like, oh, feel good about that one. But then you just watch, and it's tough. Like, you're betting thousands of games a year. You're supposed to quickly flush the bad bets and immediately shift your focus to finding your next edge. But we don't really hide from anything, and so you look at that game, and it just really was coaching. I mean, Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers staff just made mincemeat of Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer and Dan Quinn, and that was the one fear you have in a game like that. And so it's not completely surprising. The game plan, the counters, the adjustments, you name it. I mean, the 49ers knew exactly what the Cowboys wanted to do and exactly how the Cowboys were going to attack on both sides of the ball. And the 49ers were just so many steps ahead all night. I mean, you look offensively, the 49ers' protections were elite. I mean, somehow they kept Brock Purdy clean. Micah Parsons was an afterthought. You didn't even know he played in that game. He had one quarterback hurry all night. If you look at Dan Quinn, the pressures were obvious, both in timing, right, the down and the distances he sent them, the locations of the blitzes, and not being able to get pressure on Brock Purdy changed that entire game. Because we talked about the massive delta between clean and pressure performance from Brock Purdy. And once there wasn't a threat of pressure, then all of a sudden Shanahan could unlock Kittle, which we said if that was a possibility, like he had some matchup advantages there. The Cowboys didn't really allow explosive runs, but they were bullied down in the trenches as well. I mean, 58% rushing success rate for San Francisco, and then offensively for Dallas. Woo boy. I don't know where to begin. I mean, I don't really want to take pot shots, but take a look at Mike McCarthy. Visualize that man. His offense plays as lazy as he appears. And you look at who Mike McCarthy made his offensive coordinator. Just inept. And you look at this offense, it has no creativity. There's no motion. There's no play action. The idea that you're going to live in 11 personnel all night and think Dak Prescott's going to be your savior. You don't know who your quarterback is. The route trees, I mean, it's either this scared dump off short or a hope and a prayer deep. It was just lazy offense. And I think to this point, Todd, like if you can buy the Cowboys when they can play bully and there isn't a coaching mismatch, you probably find some value with them. But if the talent isn't a mismatch and the coaching is, Dallas is likely a fade.
Yeah, and we're seeing it again. I mean, this is a Cowboys team who has a limited ceiling. For those people that came into the year, I mean, you can put ourselves in that vein that thought, hey, look, maybe things will finally click and this team will be a legitimate threat in the NFC. When you look at a game like that, you realize how big the disparity is between what Dallas will bring in a game of that magnitude and what the 49ers can do. Putting the coaching staff for the Dallas Cowboys heads into a pretzel, and every chance Dallas had, albeit a few and far between, to try and get back into the game. It's a penalty here. It's a 3rd and 14 there. I mean, just the little things. Brock Purdy stepped up, made the big throws, and Kyle Shanahan deserves a world of credit for putting his quarterback in a position to be able to make those plays, especially in a game where Christian McCaffrey, largely to your point, was an afterthought in terms of the explosive runs we've grown accustomed to since he was traded over from the Carolina Panthers.
Think about some of the things that transpire in that game, and I think you hit them perfectly. By no means is Dallas the right side in that game, and I'll never even come close to making that case. But you start that game, you're right, 7-0. Okay. Kyle Shanahan's script got you. I mean, it gets virtually every defensive coordinator, right? And then you start to think about some things in that game. It's like, oh my God, we got the touchdown. We finally decided to throw it deep a little bit. And it's 14-7. And you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, I feel fine. 14-7, 3rd and 6. Your defense loses its mind. You get off the field and then you taunt a guy. And so instead of your ball back, you give up 7. And then right out of the gate of the half, okay, you're down 2 scores. Let's figure this out. You're in the green zone. It's 3rd and 4. Of all the options on 3rd and 4, Rico fucking Dowdle.
The inside handoff.
Right, like, what are we doing?
Inside handoff.
What are we doing?
You have a chance there, Payne, and you go in with the mindset that if we don't pick up a yard, we're going to kick a 50-yard field goal. Let's run the inside handoff and hope that the 49ers are asleep at the wheel.
Think about that thought process down 2 scores. We're going to run on 3rd and 4 to Rico Dowdle, and we're going to attempt a 50-yard field goal as if our defense has gotten off the field tonight. Do you understand how bad that is? Like, you couldn't fathom, like, I couldn't hand him his paycheck this week if I'm Jerry Jones. Who comes up with that?
Maybe he called Mario Cristobal and got that kind of advice.
It's so bad, and it's so obvious. Like, I mean, all right, we flushed it. We're officially over that. I mean, all right. Let's get to the good.
Let's go into the good, and I'm going to give you a chance to exercise the demons and get it off your chest. So fire away with what stood out to you in a positive manner.
Well, it's kind of good. Me being the positive, me being the glass half full guy. I'm going to talk about a positive in a game where I lost money. By another fucking incompetent head coach. Okay.
Sometimes they tell you
Desmond
have to laugh
Ridder.
to keep from crying on Monday mornings in this business.
You'd never know it was a profitable Sunday somehow after all of that disaster. Desmond Ridder was really good. I thought he showed confidence. He showed poise in the pocket. He was actually getting through some of his reads. 2nd in passing success rate. 5th in EPA per pass. But the mind-boggling thing here is, if you look, the Atlanta Falcons, their early down passes delivered a 59% success rate. Their early down runs, just a 32% success rate. So what did Arthur Smith do? He loaded up on the early down runs, baby.
When you have a chance to run the ball in known running situations against a defense that can't stop play action, you have to take those opportunities, Payne, especially in plus territory.
And you feel bad, right? Like, hold on to the ball if you're Bijan Robinson coming out of the half. The problem is there's 97 defenders in the box just all swiping at him because it's so obvious the run's coming. So it's like, you kind of feel bad for him in that sense. But it was a good performance from Desmond Ridder. If you got anything less, you don't win that game, and because of the coaching staff and because of some of the miscues. And I'll just be candid, we're joking around, right? It's a game we lost money, and we originated that over at 41, closes, call it like 42-2, right? It was a mix between 42 and 42.5. Some other groups kind of tailed us on that one, but you just want to pull your hair out again because it's another very good bet that went by the wayside, and you start to go through like the drive possessions there, and Jonnu Smith drops a ball on the 3rd possession of the game that would have set up like 1st and 10 around the green zone. Instead, it's a punt and pin, so it's just a massive shift in EPA there. And then to start the 2nd quarter, because Arthur Smith is a little bit inept, right? Atlanta has a 1st and 10 from the Texans 39. Come away with 0 points there. Late in the second quarter, Atlanta has a 1st and 5 from the Houston 32. Came away with 0 points there. Second possession out of halftime. Jonnu Smith fumbled the ball at the Houston 13. Right, 0 points there. So it's one of those games where you go back, you look at the EPA, you go look at the yards gained, and it's a game that should have 51 points scored. You can't win. So very good performance from Desmond Ridder. And I think what's kind of annoying here is, and not that we played at any semblance of a level that deserves recognition, but the one thing I think probably we both had a little bit is, as like players, you kind of have a feel for the game. You kind of know like when things are going right. You kind of know when things are working. It's like Arthur Smith doesn't have a clue. How you didn't feel Desmond Ridder just showing so well in that spot, the way he was throwing the ball, the way he was getting rid of it quickly, how he was decisive, how he was actually going through and getting sometimes to a second and third read. How you didn't kind of just see that and open up the playbook was a little bit wild.
A night and day performance from Desmond Ridder, given what we saw against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, where he stared down receivers countless times versus a guy that showed poise, showed confidence, and most impressively got most of his receivers involved. I mean, you saw Kyle Pitts. You saw Drake London with a massive catch when they needed it. You also saw Jonnu Smith, the drop notwithstanding, get involved. So 3 different players, all with significant impacts on the offensive side in a game where they were bottled up for stretches on the ground. And Desmond Ridder continues to be a guy that you back at home to win football games and struggles on the road. If we go all the way back to Thursday night, Payne, I know the Bears obviously came under a ton of scrutiny, and you can understand why, but we saw glimpses of an offense in their loss against the Denver Broncos, but they kind of flushed that loss completely, came out with a dynamic game plan. Justin Fields showing confidence, especially throwing deep early. DJ Moore, a massive day, his third 100-yard receiving game over the last 4 weeks, and they made the Washington Commanders secondary look like they were standing still, especially early on in that contest, in building a 27-3 lead at one point.
They showed life against Denver. Right, that was kind of the confidence builder. It was the spark. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to come out of that game against Denver saying, "Hey, we didn't really achieve offensive success," even though that's the worst defense in the league. But they were kind of what the doctor ordered, right? And I think we mentioned that. And then all of a sudden, the Bears follow that up with an explosive offensive performance against a pretty vanilla Commanders defense on a short week that specifically we had said given up gobs of big plays through the air this season and was playing, well below expectation. And the Bears took advantage of that. If you look, Justin Fields didn't have great down-to-down efficiency. He was 19th out of 28 quarterbacks this week in passing success rate. But he was 4th in adjusted EPA per pass. So they were hunting the deep plays, which shows what? Hey, we've identified something on film that the Commanders have a problem defending some deep shots. Right out of the gate, they took one to Mooney. It was just a little off target. So we have the right game plan, right? We have at least an offensive mind that's able to watch the game plan or watch film and be like, hey, we're going to devise a game plan to attack these areas. And then you go out and execute it. And I understand you're probably not going to get those type of performances from DJ Moore every week, but that's what you needed to win this game. You found the weakness of the Commanders' defense, you attacked it, and it led to victory.
I mean, look, if we're talking about receivers and quarterback combinations, we saw one return to a level that we've seen in the past yesterday in their win against the Arizona Cardinals, and that was Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I mean, it was pretty much Burrow to Chase from start to finish. Burrow finishes 36 of 46, 300-plus yards, and throws a trio of touchdowns. The good thing for Joe Burrow and Bengals fans alike, he definitely showed a little bit more mobility in the pocket. He was under duress, able to scramble away. Not quite to 100%, but a lot more than what we've seen. And then it's Jamar Chase reaping the benefits of T. Higgins being out. 15 catches, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns on 19 targets. Sets the franchise record for catches. I know it came against the Cardinals, and maybe water's finally meeting its level for Jonathan Gannon's bunch, but at least a breath of fresh air for a Bengals offense that had been mired in mediocrity, at least for the first few weeks.
Yeah, I think it's very much twofold here, right? And again, this is similar to the Bears. Like sometimes you need a confidence-building performance. And I think what we saw from the Bengals offense was certainly Joe Burrow feeling better. He wasn't on the injury report this week. You could see him navigate the pocket a little bit better. He was able to read his first progression, wasn't there, bounced to the second and even third. And he really wasn't navigating the pocket like that in previous weeks. He also evaded pressure. I mean, there was a situation where they were going left to right on the TV screen. Pressure's coming. He bails out. He turns around. There's a defender at his feet. He jumps over him. And so it just looked like he was much healthier this week. And the market kind of indicated that, at least with the total.
Yep.
The second factor, obviously, is the Bengals were able to operate against a defense that gave up 31 points in a singular half to Daniel Jones and the Giants offense. So there's probably a little bit of a mix there of, yes, Joe Burrow is healthier. He's getting the ball to Jamar Chase. Not a very good defense. And I think the Bengals offense is going to improve. And you probably, if you're doing this at a sophisticated level, like creating your own numbers, you probably should completely wipe the week 1 data point against the Browns from your priors. And all of a sudden, you're looking this week against Seattle. Total's getting over money at least early in the week, and I think this probably is a good gauge to figure out if the Bengals offense is at least close to being all the way back.
Makes a ton of sense. Look, I mean, a game that was played in weather forecasts and Joe Burrow operating at about 40% capacity, not indicative of what this team was going to do going forward. Any other positives that you wanted to highlight before we pivot into some of the bad performances that transpired over the weekend?
I noticed you had the Colts jotted down in your notes. Do you want to take that one and I can expound?
Sure. I mean, we can definitely mention the Colts. Look, they deserve a ton of credit because for the second time this year, they have to go to Gardner Minshew coming off of the bench in the wake of an Anthony Richardson injury. Obviously, when you look at Tennessee and the way that they didn't plan defensively for Gardner Minshew, they had no answers. I mean, Minshew comes in 11 of 14, very workmanlike, 155 yards. He leads the Colts to good third down variance, 8 of 13. But more importantly, it was the Colts' ability to run the football, and the Titans' defensive players, they didn't sugarcoat their performance. They said they flat out got owned in the trenches, paraphrasing there, of course, from a brief interview I saw with Arden Key. And it wasn't Jonathan Taylor that everyone thought was going to be a revelation in his return. It was Zach Moss going absolutely nuclear. 23 carries, 165 yards. JT did get a few touches, but Moss also had 2 catches for 30 yards and looked like a player that does not want to relinquish any semblance of his carry share, which we know will happen over the next month against the Titans defense, whose strength all year had been against the run, but it's now 2 straight weeks that the Titans have struggled a little bit more with RB1s.
Listen, I think this is a really interesting team. We were actually pretty close. I think you and I were talking a little bit as the season approached. Hey, we're going to maybe buy on the Colts a little bit here? Like, they had some front 7 talent defensively returning, right? There's a couple nice pieces on offense. I think you and I both liked the addition of Josh Downs a little bit more than maybe the market understood his value.
Had a big catch yesterday again.
And then Richardson, at least provides a floor with his ability to run, and it's a high floor. And then the South Division was a mess, and we believed in Shane Steichen because of all the things that we kind of knew with his involvement in the Philadelphia organization. So, I mean, obviously a huge division win for the Colts despite dealing with some injuries. I think you mentioned something that was pretty astute there. It's like the Titans, if they cannot stop the run, they immediately become a bottom 5 defense. That's the one thing Tennessee's been able to hang their hat on over the last couple seasons, and it just wasn't the case yesterday. 20th in EPA per rush allowed out of the 26 defenses that have played so far this week. And there's a guy that you focus on, Tier Tart, big fella. He's missed the last 2 weeks, so it's no surprise all of a sudden the Titans' run defense just hasn't been the same. And then the other point you mentioned there is you kind of throw the curveball. Yeah, maybe you spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, but you prepare for Anthony Richardson, who's 6'5", 250, runs 4.3, and throws a country mile, and then all of a sudden you get Gardner Minshew, barely 6 feet tall, who doesn't have a great arm and minimal to no designed run ability.
But a tremendous head of hair.
But he fantastic hair. He can operate an offense, right? You can get the ball out on time and accurately. And it's just completely different from Anthony Richardson. And you look, the Titans' pass defense has been the Achilles heel for years. And so Minshew actually finished 2nd among all quarterbacks this week in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Colts get a big outright win. And now you head to Jacksonville, and first place is on the line.
A little revenge from week 1 and a showdown, albeit with a different quarterback taking the majority of reps with Gardner Minshew getting the nod. Obviously, with the good comes the bad, Payne, and we can go to what we saw Sunday morning. I think it's an outlier more than anything else, other than some of the injury concerns that continue to mount for the Buffalo Bills. You lose Tre'Davious White last week, and in the Bills' defensive scheme, it's not an absolutely massive loss or something that was going to potentially cripple what they could accomplish this season. But now you lose Matt Milano, and it's not exactly sure how long he'll be out, but he did a lot to make that defense significantly better. Sure, you add Von Miller back, but the injuries are starting to mount for a Bills defense that there were questions about coming into the year, and you wonder how many of these injuries they can endure before you start to see a noticeable drop-off.
I don't know if they added Von Miller back. Let me just phrase it that way, and it's not to cause concern, but my understanding there is they did him a solid. He had never played an overseas game. He wanted to add that to the career resume. They put him out there. Looked like a shell.
Yeah, he didn't look like he was contributing much. That is for that's for
he was
damn
not.
sure.
He's not healthy. He's not healthy. I think you need to reevaluate that situation, especially if you have Super Bowl hopes, and the Bills do. You keep him out a couple weeks is my feeling there, but we'll see. You mentioned the defensive injuries. I believe very early on in that game, I mean, you ended up with like 5 starters down. A couple guys obviously missed that we knew would miss, and then you lose a couple guys. It was just total attrition on that side of the ball. But it looked like a team that came off its most emotional win of the season against a division rival in Miami, and then arrived in London at the last possible minute like Sean McDermott chose to do, right? There's ways to take those London trips. You can either get there super early or show up super late just so you can get your body in rhythm. And, again, the defense was down a bunch of starters. Jacksonville, their defense appears to be relatively real. Stopped the run, made Buffalo one-dimensional, and held on for dear life.
Look, the Jaguars obviously didn't go out there and put together a solid 4 full quarters. That's for sure. They gave the Bills every opportunity in the world to get back into the game, but Jacksonville benefited immensely with their second game in many weeks out there in London. The Baltimore Ravens, Payne, I know we talked about this game in a deep dive on Thursday against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it sounds cliche, but you throw the numbers out when these teams do battle, and that may have been the poster child for it because it was a tale of two halves. Baltimore goes into the break up 10-3, should have had a much larger lead, and the Steelers play what felt like about 4 good minutes of offensive football in the second half. But you know what? You get a big play on special teams as safety. You get the big explosive pass play over the top from Kenny Pickett to George Pickens, and suddenly it's the Steelers coming away with a 14-10 win after the Ravens let about a zillion chances slip through their fingers.
The 2-minute handicap, baby. They just have not lost this year. And I know you and I joked about them, right? Just picking the spots in the NFL, and I think I talked to Billy a little bit about that. But you kind of go down the list last week of what the 2-minute handicaps were, right? It's Chicago on Thursday, it's Jacksonville, it's Atlanta, it's Pittsburgh, it's Cincinnati. All of them cover. And so this game is one of those where you wonder how Pittsburgh survived. I mean, the Ravens were the clear-cut side the first 2.5, 3 quarters. I was a little shocked watching it, but in the moment, you kind of felt it a little bit where it was kind of gravitating towards Pittsburgh, and you're like, oh my God, this is actually going to freaking happen. How is this? And I don't know what the Ravens are doing. I'm having a hard time assessing the Ravens. I really am, because they were so beat up early in the season, still are. So you kind of want to give them a pass, but they're winning some of these games. And then they stub their toe against the Colts. Then they come out and they look like $1 million last week, but it's against a backup quarterback. And they really haven't played many good quarterbacks this season, so you kind of want to downgrade them. But again, like, they've dealt with their own injuries. It's a very, very tough team to gauge. Rashad Bateman catch the freaking ball. You're watching Lamar Jackson, awesome game against Cleveland. Then suddenly we're throwing jump balls to OBJ. Number one, the pass is so ridiculously inaccurate, it boggles my mind. But number two, is this where we're at in the offense where we're throwing jump balls to OBJ?
It wasn't much of a jump ball. It was more of a line drive right into the defensive back's chest.
I don't love the play. How about we run a play? Listen, I like OBJ as much as the next guy, but I think we're past the point of isolating him up outside and having him try to out jump somebody. I mean, he's still a very good route runner. How about we run an in? Some of the stuff that I see out there just boggles my mind. So I thought the Ravens pissed down their leg. It was a typical Pittsburgh victory where they do very little and somehow just manage to find a way. There's T.J. Watt. I mean, just come on. That guy's just winning them games single-handedly on the defense side of the ball.
He might be the most valuable offensive player that they have on the entire roster, given what we've seen from TJ when he's healthy and what he means to the defense. You look at the end of the first half situation for the Baltimore Ravens, that may have been the perfect microcosm with Tyler Linderbaum thinking he's drawing a player off sides, Lamar not being ready for the snap, Lamar scrambling, throwing it away, and the Ravens come up empty-handed. But that was the Ravens in a nutshell in their performance, losing yet again on the road against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Payne, the final thing that I had in the bad category that can obviously transition into the ugly, the New England Patriots. I mean, they're yet to score 20 points 5 games into the season, 20 points in a game. That is something that it's only done 3 times before. 10 turnovers are tied for the most in their first 5 games since they had 12 in 1995. I mean, Bill Belichick had one 30-point loss on his resume as a head coach. He now has 2 in back-to-back weeks. Mac Jones, once again, gets the dreaded vote of confidence. He's still QB1 despite getting pulled for the second straight week. He hasn't had more than 12 completions. I mean, this looks like it's going from bad to worse for New England on both sides of the ball.
There's got to be something going on internally there for it to look this bad. Mac Jones was horrific, and I understand the Steelers, or the Saints defense rather, is very good. Let's just put it that way. Now, obviously, they showed signs at home against Baker Mayfield of being old, and there's going to be signs of that, I think, throughout the season where the Saints kind of have a head scratcher, and you're like, oh, old guys didn't really play overly well this week. But what's going on in New England is head scratching. I mean, Mac Jones, 26% passing success rate, negative 0.7 EPA per drop back, worst of the week so far. It's not just him, though. Offensive line has not been great. Run game got stifled a little bit yesterday. The pass catchers, and this is an organizational thing. I mean, think about what they did. They decided to extend Devontae Parker, one of the worst separators in the entire league.
You've been saying that for 3 years that Devontae Parker can't get separation. I think the stat was last year is about 130th out of 135 qualifying wide receivers.
It's bad. And you have Mac Jones, who, I mean, he's a guy who's an accurate passer, so most of Parker's work is done on the jump ball, which he's very good doing, right? He can go up and win that 50-50. He can go up and even win the 40-60. But in terms of that being your number one, it's a little bit scary. And then you think about what the organization did to help out in the receiver room. I mean, you invested a draft pick in Jacoby Myers. You worked with him for, 3 years, maybe 4 years, to build. And you said, no need. We'll bring in Juju, who we have no attachment to, who's probably going to be out of the league shortly here. Guy can't separate. Guy can't win. Not healthy. I just start to wonder how this is going on. I mean, you think about the transition, right? Think about this. Nelson Aguilar has a monster year for the Raiders. I believe it was like a $1.1 million deal. Fantastic signing at the time. Then all of a sudden, New England's like, yeah, that's our guy. We're going to go pay him 25x what he just made last year to bring him in. Doesn't do anything. Goes to Baltimore this year.
Already contributing.
Look, already contributing. So this isn't just a Mac Jones thing. I understand Mac Jones isn't very good right now, but there are problems everywhere in this offense.
Problems in the offense, problems in the defense, problem in River City, and you wonder how much longer this relationship will continue to coexist between Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick if things get even further off the rails for a once proud franchise that has not made the best player personnel decisions, whether it's in free agency or in the draft over the last couple of seasons. In the ugly department, Payne, I have a feeling you're going to take us to the Mile High City.
I hadn't planned to, but yeah, let's do that. I mean, that was, I was getting multiple texts there. I somehow was the calming influence yesterday. So again, another peel behind the curtain was, we bet the over in that game. We originated that one over 40.5, peaked at 44. There was a little resistance there, closed 42.5. And boy, was that a dead nut over, but it became an EPL match. And I'm watching 2 head coaches, 2 offensive minds, just battle to see who could call the worst red zone plays throughout the entire game. It was mind-boggling what I was watching. And so for the Jets, I charted this. One pass reached the end zone during their red zone trips. Everything was either a first down run, a second down run, or a pass that was short of the end zone. And you start to think about where you're playing this game, right? It's in Denver. It's at altitude. You can kick a field goal from fucking 60. And it's like 3rd and goal from the 6. It's a dump pass. I mean, and it wasn't much better for Sean Payton. There was a series for Sean Payton there, Todd, where throws behind the line of scrimmage on first down that lost 2 yards. Runs on 2nd and goal from the 7, just doing nothing but shrinking the space in which your offense has to operate. And then on 3rd down, runs QB draw with 2 linebackers in the middle of the field with their feet cemented at the goal line. That, of course, gained 0 yards. I mean, the things that I watched from both offenses in the red zone yesterday were wild. And Sean Payton's a guy, right? I mean, won a Super Bowl. We think of him as a very good offensive mind, very good play caller. A couple series down there where you're like, my God, you could not try to call 3 worse plays. And Sean Payton somehow figured out how to. So that was one of those games that was wildly annoying. And fortunately got there. But, man, I'm not quite sure what was going on there in the red zone yesterday. That was as ugly gets from both sides. Anything else your way, Todd, for the ugly?
No, I mean, not anything else that really stood out to me in any particular fashion. I mean, just a weird week overall with so many unique things unfolding across the NFL landscape.
Yes, should be interesting. I think we've kind of wrapped this section up. We want to do look headlines before we get to the injuries.
We may as well get into some of the look ahead numbers. Before we do so, you can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. You can also follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And you mentioned look ahead numbers. We can start with the Minnesota Vikings, who were a 4.5-point road favorite for their trip to Soldier Field to take on the Bears. Now we're looking at the Vikings right around a 3-point favorite for this road trip within the division, and obviously seen some under money come in on the total as well amid speculation that the Vikings may not have their full complement of weapons.
I think you said it all. Minnesota failed to win. Chicago's offenses look better the last 2 weeks. Got a nice upset win in front of the world on Thursday Night Football. Justin Jefferson, highly questionable. Extra time where hopefully you get a defender or 2 back for the Bears. And so that's the cause of the movement on the side. The total was as high as 49.5. Blew through some important numbers there, and you're now at 46. We've seen the Vikings defense start to trend up a little bit. And I think ultimately what will be interesting is if this gets to 2.5, do we start to see some Vikings money? And my suspicion is yes. That's just my vibe there. But we'll see. I mean, very much early in the week we're buying prices there, trying to get out ahead. And so with the Justin Jefferson situation, it makes sense taking some 3.5 and going under 49.5 and then figuring out what to do with it later. And that's very much the vibe of that game so far.
49ers following up their signature performance at home on Sunday Night Football against the Dallas Cowboys will go out to the Eastern time zone for the second time this year to take on a team from the AFC North. This will be the Cleveland Browns. You were looking at the 49ers, a field goal favorite in this spot. That number has now ballooned out to 4.5 amid questions that I'm not sure anybody knows the exact health and or status of Deshaun Watson.
And I think ultimately that will dictate where the next move is. Not to shortchange that one, but ultimately, you have the Browns look horrific the last time we saw them without its quarterback, and that's at the time, right, an injury to his throwing shoulder. And so very unclear on if he's going to be up or if he's going to be 100%. And then you get the 49ers demolition of the Cowboys in primetime on Sunday Night Football. And so that's the reason for that initial move there in openers.
The rich get richer, and teams continue to see their market power ratings take a massive nosedive when you don't come anywhere close to covering on the road against a beleaguered, I shouldn't say beleaguered, Detroit Lions side, one that didn't have their full complement of weapons. We'll leave it at that. The Dolphins, 10.5-point favorites on a look-ahead number, now out to a 2-touchdown threshold against the Carolina Panthers. We see both double-digit favorites or those close to it last week cover with ease. Detroit, 42-24 winners over Carolina, and Miami, a somewhat misleading score against the New York Giants as they probably could have won that game by 4 touchdowns.
There you go. You said it again. And that's the recipe for a change in price. I think the belief was, and a lot of the guys that we spoke to last week were, sure, it feels like a very good spot potentially for the Lions, but they're a little bit banged up, and we're now reaching a price point on the Panthers that maybe yields some value at 10, and so you saw it dip below that as a close on game day, but you start to wonder if this is potentially the worst team in the league. And
is it worth wondering at this point, or can we just come out and say that they're the worst team in the league right now?
I think the market's saying that. And then to your point is the Miami Dolphins very much, won yesterday with ease. And, you see about a 14-point swing there with the pick six that went 102 yards. The Giants were really not competitive. And you started to get a little bit better of a defensive performance from the Dolphins. Again, I understand it's the Giants' offense, but you held them to like 9 points on that side of the ball. So really, Carolina has not done anything offensively if you remove garbage time from the equation.
One game that we've already seen a move, and one of the teams involved in it hasn't even played yet this week, that being the Raiders and Patriots. The Raiders were a 1.5-point favorite on a look-ahead number. They're now out to a full field goal. We talked about some of the issues that have plagued New England over the last couple of weeks, but before we even have an additional data point for the Raiders, the market has responded quite favorably to the performance they anticipate coming tonight against the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, that one is a little surprising. Wasn't quite sure we'd talk about that one because the Raiders haven't played tonight. So right now that readjustment is 3. Belichick against
old Joshy boy,
one of his old guys. Yep. And so I think the next move is very much predicated on how the Raiders perform tonight. And I know we're going to get to that game shortly, and the Raiders are taking money tonight. So my assumption would be if the Raiders go out and win handily, you probably could see that game tick to 3.5. If they somehow lose that game outright, there's probably a belief that Belichick is going to get the better of his old staff member, and that you're buying the Patriots at the absolute floor, and that would come off the 3. So I think it's very much predicated on how the Raiders look tonight in terms of the next move on a key number.
And before we even get to that breakdown, obviously a number of key injuries that we're monitoring in terms of players that will or won't play as early as this evening for the Raiders' home game against the Green Bay Packers. But there were plenty of injuries that we saw unfold over the weekend. Justin Jefferson being one. We saw Joe Burrow look a little bit better, but a slew of difference makers that you're anxiously waiting with bated breath to figure out if they'll be active and available for your betting purposes and or fantasy lineups next weekend. So nobody better than to share his perspective than Dr. Deepak Chona, who you can follow on social media at SportMDAnalysis.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, thanks for the intro, guys. Excited to be joining you for another week. Now, the biggest name in fantasy football just went down, and that is the Vikings' Justin Jefferson. By video, it looks like a mild hamstring strain. The average on these would be about 1 to 2 weeks. While his status for week 6 is to be determined, the data would favor him sitting. We'll certainly be following that practice progression closely, but again, data favors him sitting. There is about a 10% increased risk for re-injury for Justin Jefferson when he does return. And then we have Cooper Kupp. Now, coming back from a hamstring strain, Cooper Kupp's re-injury rate is a little higher because he's crossed that 30 threshold, age 30 threshold. So his re-injury risk is about 15 to 20% for the next month. But really the most common outcome here is continued star wide receiver production. And then Breece Hall. Now this is a great comeback story. By the ACL data, he's really only probably 85 to 90% right now. We have him at 90% crossing at week 6. So the Broncos' run defense is obviously terrible, and that may have inflated his numbers. So from an explosiveness standpoint, from a speed standpoint, we expect continued improvement for Breece Hall, which could be a scary picture for the rest of the league. Then we have Travis Kelce. Now the video on this suggests a low ankle sprain. The tape job and the fact that he came right back suggests the same. It looked a lot worse just purely based on his reaction. But when you watch the injury video, there wasn't any severe aspect to it. So typically this would require no missed time or production dip for a pass catcher with a mild elevation in his re-injury risk. Overall, pretty low concern for Kelce. Then we have the Colts' Anthony Richardson. He went down with an AC sprain. We found out this morning they're calling it a grade 3 sprain, which is more severe than what we saw Derek Carr come right back from without missing any time. And while an early return is still possible, usually with these you're looking at 3 to 4 weeks out. Now it is also hard to imagine them rushing back their rookie franchise quarterback, so I would not be surprised if he ends up on the IR. And long term with this, fortunately, there is not really any concern. Most players do not have surgery. This is kind of one that could go either way. But in most cases, you wouldn't want to do a throwing shoulder quarterback surgery if you really don't have to. Then Daniel Jones. This is a little more concerning. So he's had a prior neck surgery, and then now he was getting a workup with x-rays in the locker room and then likely an MRI pending per the reports. That sort of hints that this is in the area of the prior surgery. So we have some concerns. Again, most of these neck injuries tend to be minor sprains that players play through after about a week out. But just the prior history makes this one a little more of a red flag than normal. And then James Conner. By video, looked like an MCL sprain. He was jogging afterwards, so altogether it looks like a low severity type of injury. The average is 1 to 2 weeks without a major performance impact. So when we look at his practice reports this week, we'll learn a lot as to whether James Conner will try to play. I suspect that answer is going to come down to a game time decision this week, but we'll see how he practices. Then one guy to keep your eye on, but there's some reassuring evidence. Devon Achane, he, by video, looked like he suffered a high ankle sprain, but he did come back in the game. It was already really towards the end, and it was already a blowout, so they didn't really use him much after, and he didn't play a lot after. But there is a high risk of missing at least a week, as we know with high ankle sprains. So we're hoping that this one was a case which does happen where the video just looked worse than the actual injury itself, but it's a little bit to be determined. So just keep an eye on your practice reports for Devon Achane. Then Tank Dell. Now he's going to be in concussion protocol, and as we know, that generally means out 1 week and returning the following, but no performance hit upon return. And then Zay Jones. He had a repeat sprain on a knee injury that he just came back from, and that is bad news, because it means usually a multi-week absence, and when he comes back, usually also a performance dip. So not great news for Zay Jones, who had just come back from injury. Then we have Joe Burrow. Now he looked much, much better, more mobile in the pocket, and even scrambled a little bit, and that we haven't seen since probably this whole season. So Joe Burrow looks to be improving, and you usually see a pretty big step up in calf strains from week 2 to week 3, which is where he was right now. So we don't expect any major changes as long as Joe Burrow avoids the catastrophic re-injury. And that re-injury risk is actually going to go down at week 6. So he's 3 weeks into that comeback. So 3 weeks from now, we look at Joe Burrow as probably close to his full strength player. Then we have a few injuries on guys who didn't play this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he is a little bit dicey of a situation in the sense that we haven't gotten a lot of clarity on what the underlying injury actually is here. The concerning thing is that they said he suffered the injury during the last game, and he played through it, which players commonly do, while the adrenaline is going on. But the timeline of him being out this long does give some hint that this could be a sports hernia, because the other most common injury here in this location is an abdominal strain, and usually these are something that players recover from pretty quickly and wouldn't cause a whole week of missed practice and a missed game. So if it does turn out to be a sports hernia, these can sometimes be played through without a huge performance hit, but there's a high risk of it getting aggravated or getting worse throughout the season. And now if he doesn't return to the practice field this coming week, a lot of players would consider surgery for that type of issue, which would average a 3 to 4 week return. Again, we're speculating a little bit here, so I don't want to go overboard, but there is some cause for concern, as we discussed with Amon-Ra. Then we have Javonte Williams. Now, the data projected actually a 70% chance of him being active, and that data tends to be accurate about 80 to 85% of the time. So we suspect that they were just playing it slow with Javonte Williams, and there may be some workload limitations as he works back into the mix. But when you have an injured hip flexor, it's a little bit of a compensatory injury to begin with, so it does lead to a little higher risk for your knee and for your ACL. So we are happy to see him go slow from the comeback, but you may see some limited workloads as he works his way back in. We do expect him back this week, though. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, a late week addition to the injury report here with a hamstring strain. The fact that he was added to the injury report at the end of the week, but he still had a limited practice on Friday, confirms that this is in fact a mild severity injury. So we do expect him to be active this coming week. Then we have T. Higgins. Now, while he was listed as questionable in a game time decision, there was really limited chance by data that he was going to play. So for next week, he does have a good shot. The average on these is about 2 weeks, so he's right around that window for next week. But usually with a numbing injection, players can play, but they still do have noticeable performance dips if active. And then we have a few players going tonight. Aaron Jones. Now, we would lean towards him playing. When older running backs return from these hamstring injuries, they do tend to see fewer touches in their first week back, and that was last week for Aaron Jones. The fact that he stayed on the report and continued to have limited practice sessions doesn't tell us a lot. Usually the second week is when they return to their pre-injury baseline. So we do anticipate a reasonably strong performance from Jones on Monday and a 2/3 chance that he does play. And then Christian Watson. Now, wide receivers with Watson's profile, coming off of moderate severity hamstring strains, they tend to follow this 60, 80 to 100% 3-week progression. And this week projects to be his 80% week. In most formats, that's a pretty solid starter. Then you have Devontae Adams. Now, this one is a little dicey. The data rates it as a 60% chance that he plays, but of course it's going to be a game time decision. And he is dealing with a moderate severity AC sprain, less severe than the one Anthony Richardson is playing through, or is probably not playing through. But most of these would knock out wide receivers for at least one game. But the thing is, Devontae Adams has a history of playing through minor injuries. So our data actually rates him at a 60% chance of suiting up. And if he practices, or if he does play, we would expect only a mild performance impact. And then we have a few guys who raise some concerns. Starting with Chris Olave. Now, he played last week, or this week rather, but if you look at his reports, there were some reports that he had an ankle injury, some reports that it was actually a toe, and the toe reports did come from the team, so we think those are, of course, more reliable. Most common injury to a toe is a turf toe, but the fact that he played through it already tells us it's a mild injury. So in most cases, we would see a little performance hit, about 10%, but the rate of re-injury for this is not that high. And overall, you'd have to have a little bit of low concern for Chris Olave going forward. The key, though, is that Derek Carr, his quarterback, still dealing a little bit with an AC sprain on his throwing shoulder. And while he played last week and he played this week, we do expect continued improvements from Derek Carr as this heals up and starts to feel better. These are stable injuries, Derek Carr's variety, so they tend to improve pretty quickly. And so week 6 or 7 should be when he hits full strength, and that should be reflected in Chris Olave's production as well. Once Chris Olave gets past this likely turf toe injury, which will be about 3 to 4 weeks from now, you're looking at a return to full strength for that Saints offense. And then we have Treylon Burks. Now this one, by the data alone, he has a solid chance of returning to practice this coming week because the average timeline on these is about 2 to 4 weeks, and he's already missed 2. But given the training camp injury to his same knee, we would anticipate some real performance dips even once he gets back. And then 2 of the biggest star running backs who didn't play this week, Austin Eckler on bye, he is very likely coming back this week, and that'll be 5 weeks of rest for Austin Eckler before he returns. And while high ankles are pretty serious, they often cause performance hits even when players return. At this point for Austin Eckler, we do expect close to the full strength. Now, that's probably with a 10 to 15% production hit based on his timeline. The re-injury risk on this does exist, and it's about 15% as well. So you do have some concerns for Austin Eckler, but overall, he's probably a good starter for most fantasy football players. And then we have Saquon Barkley. So he is coming back. He's missed 3 games now. He is likely coming back next week. Based on the data so far, we would rate that at about a 2/3 chance. Now, Saquon Barkley is, of course, coming back in less time than Austin Eckler, and therefore does project to have a 20% production hit. Again, the re-injury risk for these is relatively high as well, and that's why you see players not really rushing the return so fast. But the re-injury risk for Saquon Barkley is going to be around 20% at this time point. That goes down, of course, over time. So that is all we got for now. I will kick you back over.
Not an optimistic forecast, Payne, from Deepak about Justin Jefferson with the nature of his injury, potentially missing 1 week, if not longer, depending on the severity of that hamstring strain.
Yeah, I think that's it's obviously a tough one, and I think I have a little bit of a differing view of the Minnesota offense right now. So would be a big loss. There's no doubt when you lose a guy of that caliber, and then you just kind of realize what Minnesota's offense is right now, and I believe a lot of people think it's better than it truly is if you start stripping out some garbage time stuff. And I understand the EPA, like they've had some misfortunate turnovers, and you would hope for some positive regression there. But you look at the down-to-down efficiency when it's not garbage time. This is a middling to slightly below average offense that I don't think people or the market is quite figured out that yet, and Justin Jefferson going down isn't much of a help. Now, you do get a little bit of a reprieve here against a Bears defense, but we'll ultimately see how that unfolds.
And Anthony Richardson, of course, a grade 3 AC sprain. I mean, we saw some reports come out from NFL Insider saying he can miss upwards of a month. Deepak's sentiments seem to echo there, so it's a good thing the Colts have a capable backup waiting in the wings that we mentioned a little bit earlier in the program. But obviously, injury reports, you always want to start monitoring those when they come out on a Wednesday. Even if they don't give you full clarity in terms of the players we'll see on full display tonight, when the Packers are out here in the desert to take on the Raiders, and you're looking at Vegas right now, we'll call it a 2-point favorite. There are some 2.5 starting to pop, a couple of 1.5s out there as well. Total on this game, 45.5. It's up a touch from where it opened at 43.5. Green Bay given the luxury of extra time to prepare after being blasted by the Lions on Thursday Night Football. We're going to see 2 of the 3 worst rushing teams in the NFL on full display. Green Bay checks in at 30th, the Raiders 32nd. And neither of these teams, good, stopping the run. So it'll be weakness on weakness to try and figure out who's able to identify a little bit of an edge. We know David Bakhtiari's been lost for the season for the Green Bay Packers. Jair Alexander limited, Devondre Campbell, all signs pointing to him not being out there. Aaron Jones will monitor his status. On the other side, Davante Adams, I can't imagine he'd want to miss a game against his former team, but Deepak didn't seem to sound like he is 100% sure that Davante will be out there for tonight's game. But Payne, as you look to try and assess what the market is telling us about these two teams and what we can expect from them, is there a particular side of the ball you find more fascinating than the other?
I actually think this is a really fun handicap because there's just so much variance and unknown. And I think it provides some interesting elements to this because it feels like there's been two differing viewpoints. We initially saw a little Packers money enter the market at the beginning, and then it's just been a wave of Raiders money since. But my understanding was if this were to get to 3, a big buy on the Packers would come across. And, we saw Chris this morning at 2.5, and they're the lowest in the market right now. And so I think there was probably a pretty substantial buy there from someone quite respected, is my understanding. But in terms of the matchup, right, I think you outlining all the health stuff is very interesting. The market is telling us a lot of these key cogs are going to play, right? It's more than just a tick up, right? When you go from 43 to 45.5 and now 46.5, the value of 44 is astronomical. It's the most important, number in totals. 45 has a ton of value, but health is the first thing. I would have liked seeing a full practice ramp up with extended time off for Aaron Jones and Christian Watson and Elton Jenkins. None of those guys recorded a singular full practice. All 3 should be out there. The run game, if you look at that matchup, Packers offense versus Raiders defense, it's bad on bad, right? The Packers offensive line right now is generating no push. You look through 4 games, 0.63 yards before first contact. And then Aaron Jones really hasn't been a factor since the hamstring injury. A.J. Dillon just, we've kind of been trying to nicely tell people, like, he ain't that guy. He's averaging 3 yards a touch right now with Aaron Jones out. And then the schedule of run defenses the last 3 weeks that Green Bay's faced has been elite. So you're not going to have great rushing performances. Right now, the Falcons, number 1 in EPA per rush allowed, Saints, number 2, Lions, 8. So if you're a Packers fan or you bet them, like, the hope is Aaron Jones returns a little bit. The Raiders defensively on paper present the weakest run defense of the season so far, and so you're at least balanced. And then you look through the air, and this is kind of where the matchup gets interesting for me, and a lot of this comes down to coaching. Like, Matt LaFleur is an offensive-minded head coach, right? He's getting pieces back. He's had 11 days to figure this out. The Raiders play extremely soft coverage. They want to keep everything in front, force you to methodically move the ball downfield. The Raiders, and this will surprise some people, are actually second best in the NFL so far this season, defending 15-plus yard passes on early downs. But they're bottom 5 in the league defending short throws, so they're willing to give up that 0 to 9 yard range. The problem is, it's not how the Packers passing game has operated this season, right? It's been this kind of feast or famine thing I think we talked about the past couple Mondays. If you look at non-garbage time dropbacks, the Packers have a 38% success rate. 28th in the league through the air, right? They've struggled with that down-to-down passing efficiency. If you look at all throws in a bucket and just look at EPA, the Packers are 8th in passing, and that includes the explosive stuff. So it'll be very interesting to see what Matt LaFleur came up with this week for a game plan, and if Jordan Love can execute more of that controlled throw game. So, I mean, my feeling is when you put a bow tie on this side of the ball before we gravitate to the other, it's like you think the Packers run game probably better, relatively speaking, touch healthier, a drop down in class. But I just, again, I think for the Packers to find success, for those bettors who went over 43.5 and 44 and 45 to win that bet, like, you're going to need LaFleur and Jordan Love to be more precise in that short to intermediate throw game against the Raiders secondary that's bottom 5 in the NFL in pass efficiency. They're also missing Nate Hobbs, the starting nickel corner there for the Raiders. So again, maybe that provides a little bit of help in that area of the field. But there's some clear paths to success for the Packers offense here. Let's just see if they can execute.
It could create some opportunities for Jaden Reed, who has operated primarily out of the slot and actually served to be much of a deep threat for Jordan Love to throw downfield. as you mentioned, that Hobbs injury. When we look on the other side of the ball, obviously the Raiders offense hasn't exactly set the world on fire, yet to score 20 points in a game this season. Their 15.5 points per game has them tied for 25th. They're 30th in converting third downs. And when you look at True Media, they've had the 4th most time of possession while trailing by double digits in the league. So that's obviously not consistent with their ability or desire to run the football, something that they haven't been able to do, averaging an NFL low 65.3 rushing yards per game, with at the NFL's returning rushing title leader in Josh Jacobs. He's provided much more of a viable receiving threat coming out of the backfield, but Jacobs isn't getting going, but he's not getting a ton of help yards before first contact. So when you look at the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo, clear concussion protocol. He'll be back out there. We talked about Davante Adams being dinged. Green Bay's run defense has been their Achilles heel for a while. If Jair Alexander is out there, we know they can cover in the secondary, and you'd love to see good on good with Alexander matched up against Davante Adams. But if you're the Raiders trying to cultivate a game plan and figure out how you can attack the Packers' weakness, is this the week their ground game gets on track, or do they continue to bang their head into a brick wall?
Yeah, it's probably the million-dollar question here and what's going to ultimately decide this game, because it's really been the vulnerable area for Green Bay. Now, I know you just kind of look at things and parse them out by team. The first 3 weeks, Green Bay's defense looks really improved, something we called for. But then you start to see who they played, right? It's 3 offenses that are all bottom third in the NFL. And all of a sudden the Packers step up in class on Thursday Night Football against the top 5 Lions offense, and they get absolutely crushed. I mean, Detroit averaged about 1/3 of an expected point per non-garbage time snap. Absolutely mauled the Packers front 7. Lions had a 64% rushing success rate, about 25 points better than league average. Now, you get a Raiders offense that is metrically worse than the average of the first 3 opponents that Green Bay played. So Green Bay dips back to playing the tier of offense it had success defending. The problem is, the Packers are still without the green dot and the heart of their defense in Devondre Campbell. Jair Alexander has said all of the right things about playing tonight, that he wouldn't miss this matchup for the world. Has not logged a full practice. It's a back injury, so you kind of have to see how that responds. But if he's able to play, one of the league's best cover corners. I also am intrigued by what you said with Adams, and Deepak kind of hinted at like a 60% rate of him playing. My gut says Davante Adams.
He said he wouldn't miss the game for the world, is what he said against his old team, obviously.
Yeah, and if he's out there, I would think Jair at least tries to give it a go. But if Davante doesn't go, then maybe Jair's like, hey, maybe, it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because that's kind of the game within the game everyone's like anxiously waiting to see, and neither Davante Adams or Jair are going to be at 100%. But what was interesting here is, there was a quote from Matt LaFleur after the Lions game. He said, very cliche, but we're going to have to do some things differently, because it's insane to do the same things over and over again and expect a different result. And that was in regards to what we discussed at the top, the Packers not being able to stop the run again. And Green Bay right now, 25th in defensive rush efficiency, 29th in EPA per rush allowed. But you mentioned it perfectly at the top, is that Josh Jacobs is certainly seeing the volume, but he's not getting much help from his offensive line in terms of push up front. The Raiders really aren't stressing defenses with deep throws, so defenses are loading the box, but it's bad on bad. And, the Raiders are dead last in NFL rushing. So something kind of has to give. And so there's some variance nature to that part of the matchup. I think when you look, if Davante Adams somehow doesn't play, I think he does. But it'd be interesting to see how they navigate that situation, because he's leading the league in target share right now, 38%. He's got over 53% of the Raiders' air yards. The offense just takes a massive, massive hit. I also think it's interesting, the style of defense Green Bay plays. It's been kind of allowed them to defend tight ends decently, and the Raiders just don't seem at all focused on giving their tight ends a shot. Somehow the Raiders' tight ends have seen 7 total targets in 4 games, but in my mind, I'm thinking, right, no Devondre Campbell in the middle, with the safety position for Green Bay being questionable at best, and Ford dealing with a little bit of a nagging injury. I wouldn't mind like seeing Michael Mayer, sprinkled in. Give that kid a crack or two in the throw game. And you got to start figuring out some better target distribution. I understand Devontae Adams is like an efficiency monster, but I mean, there's really not much else to this offense right now, and maybe it looks a little bit different here. Are you going to this game, by the way?
No, absolutely not. I will not be anywhere near Allegiant Stadium for this game tonight. I will make my pilgrimage down to the Strip tomorrow for the more important sporting event that'll take place in this city when we raise the Stanley Cup banner to the rafters for the night's season opener against the Seattle Kraken.
Okay. By the way, that was the most emphatic, quickest response you had all show. You were a little. I understand it wasn't the greatest weekend. But you were a little foggy there. I've never put ice skates on in my life, but I feel like I could have snuck a slap shot by you.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. My reflexes aren't anything close to what they used to be. You may be able to put a little flutter puck on me from center ice, and it would have trickled between the wickets, given the weekend I had and everything I let slip through the cracks on a variety of fronts. But we go through the trials and tribulations of life on the sports betting front. There's no doubt about it. But no, I will not be in attendance. The one thing I can say is that for those folks that will be going or trying to build in home field advantage, it's going to feel like a Packers home game. From what I've been told, the Raiders may need to elect to go to a potential silent count at some points here. So don't build in a whole lot of home field advantage for this particular spot, as the Green Bay Packers fans have flooded Las Vegas for the unique opportunity to come to Allegiant Stadium to see their team play on primetime.
Yeah, that'd be a fun trip.
So
shoot out of there, get in Friday, dick off all weekend, gamble, get obliterated. You can be able to sleep in Monday, right? Shake off the hangover. And then you get a nice meal in the belly, and then you start the tailgate.
I mean, look, today is an administrative holiday. So, it's Columbus Day, Indigenous Day, whatever the heck they're calling it now, and Canadian Thanksgiving. So a shout-out to all our brethren north of the border, who I'm sure will be fully entrenched watching Canadian football later this afternoon. But, yes, it is Canadian Thanksgiving and Columbus Day all rolled into one. But the beat goes on.
How did I get a day off? Love Canada.
I mean, okay. You don't get a day off in the States for Canadian Thanksgiving, you jabroni. That's not how things work around these parts, but it tends to be the overlap between the two. If you'd like, maybe you can send a notice to your friends in Canada and tell them they should take off, American Thanksgiving and Black Friday as well.
Well, it was divulged to the world by one Brad Powers that I like to use the word A. So I just assumed that came with getting Canadian Thanksgiving off.
I mean, you want to take the day off? You've already recorded the podcast. If you want, you could take the rest of the day to yourself.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks. Appreciate
You've done
that.
The heavy lifting. That's been required so far around
All
here.
right.
All right, let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here.
All right.
Yeah, let's get this thing figured out. We've been through worse stretches over the years. Always came out on top. The information has been good for multiple decades, and I expect it to be the same moving forward, and we'll get over this tiny little stretch of negative variance.
There is no doubt that.
Look at that. The motivation to get you back in the groove. We need some motivation out of you.
I might need a shot of Jack Daniels before we get to lunchtime, but that's a different discussion for a different day. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. By my check, another prop winner with Kyron Williams' longest rush under 13.5 yards. So hopefully that was a little salve to the wound that was the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. We'll be back with you on Wednesday for a college football breakdown headlined by the showdown in the Pacific Northwest between Washington and Oregon, with Brad back in the fold. But in the meantime, with wherever you choose to go in the Monday Night Football matchup between the Raiders and Packers, wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.